I want to start out with the deployment of the National Guard in Washington, D.C., because that is happening right now. And, 30 years ago, House Republicans, you will probably remember, demanded answers from then President Bill Clinton about the siege in Waco, Texas. And they saw the use of force by the FBI as excessive and an example of sort of big government run amok. And now we have the FBI and the National Guard on the streets of Washington, D.C. You saw it in L.A. just a month or two ago. We now have supposedly 800 troops being deployed in the next 30 days, perhaps even longer, to fight crime. And my first question to you is, do you think House Republicans will once again speak out about big government in this case?
I take it that's a rhetorical question. Yeah. Somehow I don't think they'll be objecting. I don't see any of them objecting yet to this thing, which, as you say, not just the Waco incident, which was obviously tragic in many ways, but more broadly, it's such a staple of conservative talking points, federalism, state and local control. Mm-hmm. The last thing we need is a federal government that, can deploy military, very careful with posse comitatus. Military should be used abroad. And so I agree with these conservative talking points from the old days, which were also liberal talking points mostly. I remember how hesitant President George H.W. Bush was in 92 to send the Guard into L.A. in the middle of really massive riots. 50 people had been killed. The governor wanted them in, and it was genuinely to help the LAPD in a situation that looked like it could really, really spin out of control. It had spun out of control some already. And they were there, and they helped out, and they left. And no one thought this was George H.W. Bush taking over the governance of the Los Angeles police force or the state of California and so forth. I mean, think what a contrast, right? And even that was done cautiously and reluctantly by the Bush administration. I remember the internal discussions because you don't want to set that precedent. And it wasn't a precedent. No one did it for the next 30 years, basically, because everyone understood that thank God we didn't, that was a pretty unusual situation. And here we are, no emergency, crime rates are going down. But even if they weren't, incidentally, there's no, it's not whatever, it's not Waco, it's not LA, it's just a city, and he has a little bit of a legal advantage in DC because there's no state government. Obviously, it's a kind of unusual legal situation. A little more ability to deploy the Guard here than he would normally, and I guess to take over the police department. But it's very alarming. I think too much of the coverage, honestly. I'm very curious to know what you think about this, since you know the world of the Guard and the military much more intimately than I do. But people are a little too focused on what they're doing, and they're in the streets, and they aren't being nice to the people in DC, and there's some people yelling at them. I mean, that's all interesting, obviously, and newsworthy. But what's the precedent that is being set between LA and DC is intentional. I mean, that's the main point. This isn't just like, oh, he's doing these things randomly because he's kind of doesn't understand. And look what's happened. They planned to do this. This is the design. First, you normalize the use of the Guard. Then in LA, you normalize the use of the active duty military, some of the Marines. In DC, you normalize the use of the Guard. But above all, you normalize the use of taking control of the local police department. DC's law says the congressional law that covers DC says 30 days. But Trump says, well, I can extend that, get another authorization for another 30. And actually, if Congress doesn't do it, I have this emergency power, this, I guess, Article 2 emergency power for everything. So they are really laying the predicate for the president, and then the ICE expansion. The president of the United States having a personal ability to deploy federal law enforcement at his will and whim, really, wherever he wants. He mentioned about other cities too. So I think it's very ominous, honestly. What do you think?
I think it's super scary. So first of all, we know that the Posse Comitatus Act is there for a reason. And I think what we're finding right now is we've had these laws in this country, but when you have a president like Trump and you have a Republican Party that is so beholden to him, meaning the congressional Republicans unwilling to stand up to him, you find that a lot of our country in the past has been run by these norms. And these norms can be, picked at, and sort of like 1,000 cuts. And, they're going to find a way around this. Well, around the Posse Comitatus, let's just declare an emergency. Well, what for? Is there an emergency? Well, sure, crime. Yeah, crime is real. It's real. Like, we should all be worried about that and do something about it. But like the use of the military, as you say, the normalized use of the military in American streets, it's just not something that we should be doing. And it's also really bad for the military. It's not just about what are they doing and they're not trained for this. And that is true. It's also the fact that when you deploy troops, first, it costs a lot of money. Okay, great. But the National Guard, these are part-time warriors. You're taking them from their jobs. You're taking them from their jobs and whatever it is that they do, and you're deploying them to do what? Who knows? But certainly as a display of power. This is about power and not crime. And you're taking them away from their families, in some cases, away from leave or liberty. Sometimes a lot of these guys and women they're going to school, so you're taking them out of school. And there's really the reasoning behind it is sort of dubious here. And so I feel like it's a great concern. And here's the other thing about crime. It is really important to tackle crime. There's no doubt. But if the Republicans and Trump were so serious about tackling crime in Washington, D.C., why did they essentially defund the police there? In this latest bill that passed, they cut resources for the D.C. police. I think about $67 million that would have been cut from the police budget. And that hasn't been fixed. Like we're not talking about that. That's, to me, like, hey, if you want to fight crime, you need to give the local police forces the ability to do that.
The crime thing is just a pretext, and people are being a little too, not you, but others, too credulous about it. Well, let's have a discussion of crime. And maybe it's down 25%, but it went up a lot in 2022. So it's not down quite as slow as other cities are, and et cetera. It's all ludicrous. Donald Trump doesn't care about crime in Washington, D.C. What is he? Has that been like? Does he have a lot of legislative proposals in the first 6 months to deal with the emergency? And if there's an emergency in the country, right, you have proposals to deal with it. Then maybe at the extreme case, you have to do something unilaterally. Even that's questionable. But he did nothing, as you say. The bill he was so proud of cut funds for law enforcement actually across the country, but also in D.C. And they cut funds for the government in D.C. It's one reason of the mayor's being so cautious, honestly, in dealing with Trump. She's already losing federal support. And D.C., again, is in a unique situation with being the federal city. So he's not serious about it. It's a pretext. It's a pretext for deploying the troops. And it's very bad for the troops. I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, one reason the military has such high standing in the U.S. is we've been very careful to keep it out of. It's not like a third world country where the dictator snaps his fingers and the military is suddenly cracking down on protesters. And then the military is part of the oppressive government, and then people don't like it. And there's splits in the military, and the colonels rebel against the generals or whatever, right? I mean, we have, thank God, been spared that almost entirely in our history. And I do think those headlines, authoritarian inclined president calls in federal troops on a pretext and takes over the police force in the nation's capital. If we saw that headline from...
Sounds like Sudan.
Yeah, or Latin America, or parts of Central and Eastern Europe in less happy times, or Bangkok or someplace, right? I mean, that's not... If we saw it elsewhere, we'd think, oof, that's bad. What's going on there? That could really be a slide towards authoritarianism, towards dictatorship. And we need to think of it that way here, honestly.
Because it's not just LA and DC. I mean, apparently there's plans to have this quick reaction force. So the military, what that means is the military is constantly on call, ready to go. I mean, it's not just like, hey, I'm on call by my cell phone. It's like, no kidding, ready to go. You're on the base with your stuff, ready to go when you're sort of on call and at some of these orders.
And then
anywhere in the country.
And the memo that was leaked was, anywhere in the country. And if there are protests or disturbances, well, what does that mean, right? I mean, so again, Trump's trying to really push the Overton window, however you want to say it, to kind of normalize this. And I worry that he's, it's only 7 months in, the degree to which this and many, many other areas, I mean, the degree to which he's doing things that would have been red lines. I think we all discussed this before he was in different forums, before he was inaugurated. You and I discussed it, I think, also personally. And, what would be the red lines that would show he's really going down an authoritarian path? Use of the military domestically. This would be in everyone's top 5, right, of things.
Sure.
And here we are.
Yeah, here we are. And the other thing that's really important to point out is remember in the first term, he tried to do some of this stuff.
Right.
And he was stopped. He was stopped by the then Secretary of Defense, first Jim Mattis, then Mark Esper, who then, after, Donald Trump left office, went to the public and said, this man tried to use the military in inappropriate ways, and I stopped him. And, now we have a Secretary of Defense who's not going to stop him. And, the other thing about this Trump and Republicans and the sort of anti-crime thing, we all have to remember, if they cared so much about that, why did they pardon 1,300 or 1,200 criminals who attacked the Capitol on January 6th?
In D.C. I mean, it's not an accident that it's the capital. I mean, it's partly because they think D.C. is unpopular in the country. It's been a black majority city, not actually quite anymore, but for a long time. So some of the country regarded it as kind of a different kind of place, and so forth. And it's been demonized by Republicans for an awful long time too. So they think that's one reason they chose D.C. The other reason is it's actually kind of important, like what happens in the streets of D.C., as we saw on January 6th. And having that ability to control the police force here and all the attendant federal forces, and there are a million of them, park police and people who guard the museums and people who guard the embassies, they're just different parts of Secret Service. Obviously, this is lots of different overlapping jurisdictions here. The ability that Trump has now kind of normalized, as I say, to exert control over all of them, is potentially pretty dangerous for our country, honestly. I mean, really dangerous, not just in sort of unpleasant or contrary to what we're used to.
Yeah. I get this question a lot from neighbors and just folks that are watching all of this stuff unfold, first in LA and then now in DC. And one of the questions I get is there anything we can do about this? And so that's tough. What do you think?
No, it's tough. And the LA thing, I mean, just since you mentioned, it's just the ICE. I mean, the tripling of the funding for ICE and the tripling of its size, I guess, and the recruiting that they're doing. I mean, that is not good. DHS, whatever. The military has a lot of still, even if no Mattis, no Esper, et cetera, there's still internal constraints in the military that probably slow down the ability to use the military in a really pernicious way. Honestly, I think it'd be harder. We'll see how much damage XF can do over 1, 2, 3 years. But still, I feel that's harder. That's a harder nut for them to crack. Yeah. DHS, they're just recruiting people for ICE, God knows, off the streets, basically, with huge signing bonuses. They're waiving all the normal training, all the normal criteria, it seems like, almost for, having a college degree and things like that. And who knows who's signing up for that, and who knows if they're being vetted in any serious way. And so then he's got kind of his own little police force. And then, of course, what they're doing is horrible, seizing people who are lining up to go to work and stuff. So anyway, to answer your question, but I just the ICE thing has also been seen from the point of view of immigration policy. It is very important in that respect too, and that's bad. But I think seeing it as also a threat to our democracy, honestly, and to the rule of law is important.
I do too. And one of the things that's really struck me is, with regards to ICE, is this group of masked men running around with the protection of, and the backing of the federal government. It's just with no patches, no identifying features. Those of us in the military we were in the streets of Baghdad. We weren't masked. You go and you're wearing the uniform of the United States of America. It's labeled. I feel like we're in a different place, in a place that I have never seen in this country ever. And it is scary.
Yeah, so the mask thing, I'm really, it freaks me. I mean, it did freak me out. And I complained about it on TV and something, and I was, oh no, they're having they're doxxed, they're treated badly online. People post their names, maybe their addresses if that's public. And people, in my opinion, probably shouldn't do that. Not probably, they shouldn't do that. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate if it happens to judges, which it has happened, and it's led to violence. But that's not an excuse. I mean, I grew up in New York City at a time of rising crime, really high crime. The New York Police Department, they drove around, they dealt with very tough criminals. They were in patrol cars, they had their name badge, they didn't wear masks. Obviously, if you're in some special SWAT type situation with gang leaders, maybe you wear, you disguise your identity, but not normally. To normalize that too is very dangerous, and it does lead to all kinds of practical problems, like how do we know who these people are, and are they really
Right.
ICE agent, ICE, and are they just buddies of ICE people who kind of put on the mask and came along for the ride, or are they the Fox News reporter they've gotten along to make it a publicity stunt, for Christy Nome and all that. I mean, so it's the whole thing is distressing. I mean, I think people do need to be apprised of their rights. People should feel I think honestly, that just standing there and taking the photos has had some deterrent effect, using the cell phones and stuff. I mean, I feel like that people don't, who knows what would happen if this were
Right.
really, not on camera, so to speak.
Sort of like organic body cameras. But, I also feel like this has a potential to create unrest in our country too. You're like, he's stoking, trying to create unrest, trying to get those images. Which is also, to me as an American, just sad to see that happening.